Alright guys, buckle up because this one's going to be a little bit out there. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you know I do a lot of material on how words and concepts develop and evolve over time. Now lately, my daughter's been getting into Pokémon, so we started watching some of the old episodes from the very first season. The other day we watched two episodes that really got me thinking. The first is Island of the Giant Pokémon. In this episode, the Pokémon are separated from their trainers. It's one of the first times we see these Pokémon really operating with any independence, and this is the first time we see discussions among Pokémon with actual subtitles where you can see the words that they're saying. I found this interesting because it showed the Pokémon actually having a real conversation using words and not just going off like general vibes or emotions. It also got me thinking about how generally Pokemon seem to have no trouble speaking to different species of Pokemon. Their language just sort of seems to be universal. It's not like a Charmander has to learn Pikachu to talk to them. Ash regularly uses Pikachu as something of a liaison to other Pokemon who don't want to deal with him directly. An episode later, we get this bit where a bunch of Tentacool are mad about a land developer harming their environment. At one point, they take over Meowth, one of the only Pokemon capable of human speech, and they use him like a voice puppet to communicate.
A spineless attitude like yours will only allow humans to be more cruel and inconsiderate in the future. So you say we're the spineless ones? For that you must be punished!
Kind of like that scene in Independence Day.
Can there be a peace between us?
At first, this got me thinking about how much Pokemon seem to understand human language. They go back and forth on this a bit. The games I played always treated them more like wild animals. The show usually portrays them as having at least a childlike intelligence, although pretty often they're also shown being as intelligent as a regular adult. Meowth, one of the few Pokemon with the ability to pronounce human words, eventually has a flashback episode explaining how he learned.
She sells seashells by the seashore.
She sells seashells by the seashore.
Meow. Talking was hard.
It seems like he only needed to learn how to make the sounds of human speech. He already had a good understanding of all the syntax and the vocab. I thought it was kind of odd that Pokemon seemed to automatically understand human language, but then I realized I might have been thinking about it backwards. Quick side note here. For this video, I am largely just going to ignore the fact that Pokemon was originally done in Japanese and then translated to English. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to refer to the language spoken by humans in the Pokemon world as English, because I just don't want to keep saying human language over and over again. Also, there's like 1,300 episodes of Pokemon and 25 movies. I have not seen them all, so feel free to chime in if you think I'm missing something here. Okay, so my thought is this. We all know Pokemon often have names based on some part of their physical appearance or characteristics. For example, the name Charmander comes from the word char, to blacken or to burn something, and from salamander, a type of lizard. Now consider the word orange. Did we name the fruit after the color, or did we name the color after the fruit? On the face of it, both sound about equally likely. I'll just go ahead and tell you, the fruit came first. Basically, there was a color that everyone called something like yellow-red, and there was a fruit called orange. People start saying, that thing is the color of an orange, and eventually it just became an easy way to express the color. You see the same thing happen with words like emerald, ruby, and a lot of other like colors that are also objects. Now, let's jump back to Charmander. Where did the word Charmander come from? Now, obviously in real life, these names are intentional choices made by a designer to make the Pokemon more memorable and more fun. I want you to ignore that and look at it from within the reality of the world of Pokemon. Within this fictional world, Pokemon famously say their own names. With very few exceptions, it is all that they can say. There's also usually no difference between members of the same species, like all Charmanders say Charmander, and thus humans use that as their name. So when we look at the word Charmander, within the world of Pokemon, Char still means to partially burn or blacken an object. They presumably still have things like charcoal.
You brought charcoal into our house!
And they have this fiery creature that only says, Charmander. So I ask you, within the fiction of the world of Pokemon, is Charmander named after its ability to char things, or is the word char derived from the name of the Pokemon? It seems unlikely to me that every Charmander looked at the English word, noticed that they had the ability to char things, and decided that was the one thing they were going to say. Or that an English-speaking person chose the name and that all Charmanders just went along with it.
Oh, I like that. I'll call him Hamilton.
What makes much more sense to me is that Pokemon just evolved to make their different cries naturally, same as any animal in the real world. So Charmanders have just been saying Charmander for as long as they've been around. Some human long ago kept hearing them say Charmander, and they called the animal Charmander based on the noise that it made. And then at some point, the English word char developed based on the association of that name and the Charmander's tendency to burn things. If Pokemon essentially named themselves, and their names have meaning in English, we have to assume the English word came from the name. I guess you could argue it's a complete coincidence and that Squirtles just happen to squirt water and squirting means to squirt, but that's a lot of coincidences when you think about how many Pokemon have some sort of meaningful or descriptive name. I think you have to assume they're connected. So, simply put, Pokemon must have made the sound first, and the word came later based on something about the nature of that Pokemon. So, by this logic, Scyther isn't called Scyther because its arms look like scythes. Instead, that's just a sound it makes. And thousands of years ago, some Pokemon World blacksmith invented a new tool, thought it looked kind of like a Scyther's blades, and called it a scythe. Pinsir didn't get his name because he pinches. Instead, he called himself that and inspired the name for the act of pinching. Drills are named after bee drills. Licking and tongues are named after Lickitung. You get the idea. So far, this might not be that mind-blowing, but let's go through some more interesting examples. Ninetales is obviously a Pokemon with 9 tails. We're assuming the Pokemon name came first and inspired the human words, so not only would humans have developed the word tail from this name, but also the word 9. It would just be too much of a coincidence if it just happened to say the word 9 as part of the normal sound it made, but also had 9 of something. So Ninetales, along with Doduo, Dodrio, and Dugtrio, are Pokemon names that are actually influencing the entire human counting system. Coughing, and its evolved form, wheezing, would be the source of the words for coughing and wheezing. But I think it's more interesting to look at this symbol. From a character design point of view, it's obviously supposed to look like a skull and crossbones on a poison warning, so that you can see that the Pokemon is a poison type. But within the fiction of the Pokemon world, that's just a marking that naturally forms on coughing. We could then reason that the symbolic use of a skull and crossbones might be affected by this. Interestingly, it looks like within a lot of Pokemon media, the symbol for poison actually is designed to look more like the markings on a coughing and less like our standard poison symbol. I was curious if this would extend to other uses of the symbol, such as how it's used by pirates, and it looks like maybe it actually does. Pokemon isn't exactly crawling with pirates, but it looks like most of the ones that you do see actually do stay away from the classic Jolly Roger. Perhaps in this world the standard skull and crossbones looks too much like an understood symbol for poison, and they just didn't feel like it gave them the right piratey feeling. Mr. Mime is interesting. Now obviously humans would name the act of miming after them, but there's also the Mr. Is every time someone used the phrase like Mr. So-and-so, doing so now because that's how Mr. Mime says his name? We can maybe expand this to Pokemon with royal titles, such as Kingler, Slowking, and Nidoking, or Nidoqueen. I'm not sure if King is used as a title by any humans within the Pokemon world, but if they did, it would imply that this is inspired by those Pokemon. Even weirder, most of these kingly Pokemon have something that looks like a crown. Again, we have to assume that if royalty in this world wear crowns, they're inspired by the shape of particular Pokemon heads. We can make a similar comparison to boxing gloves, karate uniforms, and other symbolic clothing that certain Pokemon seem to naturally have growing out of their bodies. So this is funny, and we could come up with these weird examples all day, but where am I going with this? To recap a few points. Number 1, Pokemon understand English despite only being able to actually say their own name. Number 2, they also understand the words of other Pokemon who also only say their own name. And 3, many English words and concepts must be based on Pokemon names. In conclusion, I posit that when a human trainer speaks and is understood by their Pokemon, it's not because Pokemon understand English, it is because humans are speaking Pokemon. There's something like 1,000 Pokemon now. The vast majority have a name with some descriptive English word. So if each of those Pokemon has inspired a word or two into the English language, that's actually a pretty good sized vocabulary. Your average adult native English speaker knows between 20,000 and 35,000 words. But you only need to know a fraction of that to be considered fluent, and even less to be considered conversational. Since English in this world is built on a backbone of Pokemon words that Pokemon can all understand, that's why Pokemon can understand English. There's sort of two ways I see that you could interpret this. The first is that Pokemon literally understand each other's names. So when a trainer tells his Charmander, use a flamethrower attack, it's not thinking of like a military flamethrower weapon. He's like, flame, oh, like Talonflame, that fiery bird. And throw, that's like Throw, the Pokemon who throws things. This guy must want me to throw some flames. When a Pokemon is told to use a claw attack, it can reference words it knows like Clauncher and Clawitzer, Pokemon with one giant claw. In order for a Thunderbolt, it's just a combination of Thundurus and Boltund, two Pokemon that generate electricity. Now, of course, Pokemon also seem to understand words that don't come directly from the name of other Pokemon, but that's kind of like understanding a sentence where you know some of the words, but maybe not all of them. The other way I see it is that if a Pokemon understands a Squirtle saying Squirtle, 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 exactly the same as it understands a Pikachu saying Pika, 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 then a human who is saying English words that are really just based on Pokemon names is kind of like saying Squirtle, Bulbasaur, Charmander. It's all made up of the same sort of words. That innate connection between different Pokemon saying their names partially extends to English because so much of English is then built on those names. Well, what do you guys think? Does this wacky theory have legs? Am I just missing something? What interesting conclusions can you draw based on flipping the language and names of Pokemon? Or do you have your own theory on this linguistic phenomenon? Until next time, thanks for watching.